Good morning. I'm now going to read part 10 of what I said in chapter 6 of Gender and Development in Nigeria. This section focuses on the key structural factors that contribute to gender inequality in Nigeria. And I consider these key structural factors, building blocks of inequality. So I examine the complex web of structural factors that underpin and perpetuate gender inequality in Nigeria. These interconnected elements embedded within the fabric of Nigerian society operate to systematically disadvantage women, restricting their access to resources, opportunities, and power, ultimately hindering their full participation in social, economic, and political spheres. So here are the 5 key structural factors. Number 1, patriarchal norms and cultural beliefs. I emphasize that patriarchal norms that are deeply embedded within Nigerian culture form a foundational pillar of gender inequality. These norms often manifest as cultural and religious beliefs that continue to confine women to the private sphere, emphasizing their roles primarily in terms of domesticity and reproduction, while discouraging their pursuit of public ambitions. This ingrained system, I argue, devalues women's contributions to society, limits women's access to leadership positions and mentorship opportunities, and reinforces the notion that leadership is inherently masculine. I highlight how these norms are often internalized by both men and women, creating a formidable obstacle to women's political and social advancement. Second, unequal protection under the law. I illustrate how structural violence is woven into the legal and administrative frameworks of the Nigerian state, resulting in a system that denies women equal protection and opportunities. The unequal protection, I argue, has profound implications for women's ability to participate in politics, inherit property, and gain full legal capacity. Reinforcing patriarchal structures. Specifically, I cite 3 factors that relate to this unequal protection under the law. One of those 3 is the historical and ongoing challenges that women face in accessing justice. 2 is the persistence of discriminatory customary laws and administrative practices. 3 is the lack of political will to implement existing gender equality. And a third building block that contributes to unequal protection under the law, to structural violence, is limited access to education and economic resources. I stress how structural violence fueled by poverty, cultural norms, and insecurity creates and perpetuates barriers to education and economic empowerment for women, trapping them in a cycle of disadvantage. This lack of education and economic opportunities has a direct impact on women's ability to engage in politics, as it restricts their access to essential resources, networks, and the confidence needed to navigate the male-dominated political landscape. I specifically highlight three factors that relate to the limited access to education and economic resources being part of the architecture of structural violence. One of the factors is the chilling effect of the Chibok and Dapchi abductions on the aspirations of parents and girls in northeastern Nigeria. Second is the significant wealth gap in education in Nigeria. Third is the negative impact of the Structural Adjustment Program, or SAP, on women's employment opportunities and access to social services. Okay, so my number 4 in the 5-part thing that I scheme that I have drawn is the prevalence of violence against women. And I underscore how violence against women, whether perpetrated by state actors or within communities, is a pervasive manifestation of structural violence. This violence, often enacted with impunity, creates a climate of fear that restricts women's mobility, silences their voices, and discourages their participation in public life. I point to the prevalence of violence against women in elections, or VAWIE, and the state's inadequate response to such violence as evidence of a broader societal acceptance of violence against women. So the unequal burden of insecurity provides further context for understanding how violence disproportionately impacts women in Nigeria. So my 5th in the architecture of structural violence is political exclusion and the failure of state action. I identify the lack of genuine political will and commitment from the Nigerian state to address the root causes of gender inequality as a key structural factor. This failure to act decisively often manifested in tokenistic gestures rather than meaningful policy implementation perpetuates power imbalances that sustain gender inequality, hindering women's political participation, their representation also in decision-making processes. So I provide, I think, a comprehensive picture of how these interlocking structural factors create as well as maintain gender inequality in Nigeria. Addressing these deeply entrenched systems of disadvantage requires a multifaceted approach that challenges patriarchal norms, strengthens legal protections, expands access to education and economic resources, ensures the safety and security of women, and promotes their meaningful inclusion in political decision-making processes. Thank you. So this is the end of part 10. More to come.